Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Justin Chu. I am the fellowship class representative to the fellowship committee. I'm a current fellow at the University of Louisville, where I'll be staying next year for joining as a faculty position. We're here to talk about the upcoming sports medicine match for applicants of emergency medicine, internal medicine, and pediatrics. We just wrapped up the family medicine version of the talk. We had a really good discussion, so hopefully we'll keep these great questions and answers flowing. There will be a period of 5 preset questions that our panelists have reviewed, and then we can open up the floor to more question and answers from the chat. So I will quickly try and share my screen here, and I'll let the panelists introduce themselves here too. And again, please mute your microphones for those of you who are not talking, just to kind of help for the sake of the conversations to go well. So I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. So floor is yours, and just take your turn, and then we'll move on with the questions. If you could say where you're working as an attending or finishing residency, and where you're going to be going for fellowship, as well as your specialty, that would help the audience.
Guess I'll break the ice. Hi, I'm Adriana Mercado. I'm currently finishing residency in emergency medicine in Ponce, Puerto Rico. And I recently matched, and I'll be starting my fellowship in sports medicine at University of West Virginia University, sorry.
Next, say I'm Adam Freeman. I'm coming out of the Air Force. My obligations up as a pediatrician, and I'm going to UT Knoxville.
I'm James Roberson III. I am EM. I am finishing my residency at Ascension Providence, Michigan State, and I will be going to Vassar Brothers Medical Center in Poughkeepsie, New York for sports medicine.
I am Margarita Tsionsky. I am internal medicine, finishing up my Army commitment and going to Atrium Carrabba's in North Carolina.
Hi, I'm Tammy. I'm currently a PEDS resident at UC Davis, and I will be starting my fellowship at UW in Seattle.
Also, I forgot to tell you, everyone, that I am internal medicine and pediatrics trained, so I fit in this category as well. And thank you again to, or not again, but thank you to the providers who've done service in the military. And I want to also congratulate the panelists on their recent match. I forgot to say that. Should have opened with that. Congratulations, joining an awesome field. So without further ado, we'll get into the preset questions. Whoever wants to take a stab at this first, how did you choose which programs to apply to?
I'll start you off. So for me, being an EM resident, it was really important to just search for programs who would accept EM trained fellows. So that was a big part of it. And then I went by location. So being close to home, Puerto Rico is super important to me. So I decided I needed like somewhere that I could travel to quickly enough in case I needed to come back home. So I just opened up a map up and down the East Coast, searched for a lot of programs. So that's sort of how I started picking them, and then searching the program and their qualities and what they trained their fellows on, and seeing if my mentor knew any of the alumni coming from that program, which helped a lot. So that's sort of what my process was like.
I also, being EM, did the same type of thing. So I wanted to look for a program that was like EM friendly. I know there's like 10 like sports, EM sports like programs, but then also like the family med programs that are that have accepted EM applicants and have had like graduates, are things that like were really important to me. And so like I was also really into like geography. I have a family, I have a wife and 2 children. So like I wanted to be close to family. And so I was looking more towards like the East Coast. So that's where my family is from. And so, I would look online at the different like programs, and I would then go through like their recent graduates or their graduates in general. Were any of them EM, or were any of them like doing anything like that? And so that was really important for me, because I wanted to have my continuity clinic. So my EM shifts, I wanted to be in the ED versus like being in urgent care and trying to get that experience. So those are things that were important for me as an EM applicant, that I looked for.
Similar story. Looking for programs that take pediatrics, you have to kind of dig down through the fine print, sometimes getting to the websites to see, okay, do you take peds or not? And are there peds grads recently? Also, I'm about 13 years out of residency, so I'm kind of the old fart on the panel. So looking at programs that had some sort of military affiliation helped. My program director is former Air Force, so a lot, just something that feels more comfortable there. And then also similar story. Southeast was a big goal, but we spent the last 7 years stationed at Wright-Patterson in Dayton, Ohio. So something that wasn't too far from my wife's family.
I think I have to echo a lot of what other people say in that for me, location was really important. But I think I approached it in a little bit more of a unique sense because for me, I applied to any program that had a direct flight from Sacramento because I'm going to be long distance from my husband. And I think just being a pediatrics applicant really does help you to narrow down the programs. And really, I think most of the places that accept peds residents are going to be big academic centers. So I first looked at any city that had a direct flight and then applied to all of the pediatrics programs and thankfully was able to match back at the West Coast. But um, I think that if you're peds, EM, or IM, they do the narrowing down for you. And so you're probably not going to be able to apply to all 100 sports medicine programs out there, but I think you still have a good handful of programs that are happy to have you as an applicant.
One final thing.
From the IM standpoint, just very quickly, there were really truly only a handful of programs that said no, we accept FMed only. Aside from that, I pretty much emailed programs in the regions that I was interested in and asked specifically, will you take non-family medicine? And based on their answer, kind of went from there.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add too is the fellowship fair at AMSSM is another great opportunity to kind of go to the different booths, kind of see, especially if you have the chance to, before you apply for the different programs, you can kind of see whether or not you're not necessarily wasting your time, but if you or even meet the criteria to be an applicant there. So just another outlet for those of you who have the opportunity to attend that fair. It's very, very educational and great networking and opportunity to meet different programs, leadership, fellows, things like that. All right, next question. And again, obviously the different specialties are being represented here. So how did your specialty influence what programs you applied to? We kind of did talk about this a little bit, but if you want to take this question in a different way too, whether you want to talk about the specifics of EM shifts, or IM peds backgrounds, things like that too, have at it.
Maybe I can take, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
In terms of picking programs, so pediatrician, in my case, it was kind of it kind of narrowed down, do I want to go to pediatric programs or do I look at internal medicine programs? And I'm kind of mid-career right now, kind of doing a pivot. And so for me, actually the family medicine programs, I did apply to peds programs too, but the family medicine programs kind of giving me a chance to expand my age range and kind of the aperture of job opportunities post-fellowship was something important to me. So I actually kind of ranked the family medicine programs that took peds higher than the peds programs for myself in terms of deciding on which programs. And that was just a personal where I wanted my career to go after the military.
So for me, as an EM resident, I was gonna say, as Dr. Roberson mentioned, it was really important that I do shifts in the ED because I want to continue being an ED physician after fellowship. So just finding a program that knows where to put you and how to handle your ED shifts along with your fellowship training was really important for me.
I think this was alluded to earlier, but similarly, for me, it was pretty important that I went to a program that gave me exposure to both adults and pediatrics because I would love to be able to do as much sports medicine as I can. And I think it can be pretty hard to market yourself as a pediatrician because the sports med patient population is, I think, heavily skewed towards adults. And so for me, because I wanted to be able to do as much sports medicine as I could in the future, I needed to make sure that I got enough fellowship training with adults so that when I interview for jobs in the future, I can comfortably say that, yes, I have the experience working with both patient populations.
Excellent. I like it. Next question. What is the general timeline for interviews?
So the way I kind of looked at it, it's like the applications like open like now. I think like those who are gonna apply like for this upcoming year, like they can like get their like token and start applying and fill out their application like in the next couple of days. Usually I feel like, at least for me, I noticed like the interview season was like August to like maybe like late November, mid to late November. But yeah, I mean, I think like that's generally the timeline. So you kind of start like now, you're getting like your stuff together, and then you interview through the fall. For EM specifically, I know like we apply like in like now, like for the summertime, but like the match isn't until in January of next year. So like I know some like a lot of EM specifically, if you're like EM interested and you like have other things that you're looking into, they match like EMS or like any of the other EM fellowships in like November or like December. So like coming in January, it's a little bit later. So that's just something from the EM side that you kind of have to look into as you apply. But
I actually just pulled up the spreadsheet that I made for all of my interviews, and it looks like all of the ones that I had, with the exception of one, were in both October and November. And so I would advise that you don't make the mistake that I did, which is kind of just leave my schedule up to my chiefs, because what ended up happening was that my residency timeline essentially matched that of pediatrics. And so my pediatric co-residents who are going into NICU and whatnot, all of their interviews were in August and September. And so assuming my chiefs like kindly assumed that that's when my interviews would be. So all of my elective time was during that time. And I was actually doing all of my interviews during pretty much inpatient time. I had to do some coming off of night shifts. So for me personally, I would say if you could, I would block out or try to make most of your outpatient rotations occur during October, November, because that I think is when the most high yield interview season is.
Yeah, to be honest, and to bounce off of what Dr. Roberson said once again, I don't really remember exactly the dates that I interviewed, but I do remember for EM, it was like pretty late after everyone had matched. And it was a little nerve-wracking just to be sitting there waiting for your match results when everyone else was already matched in EM. So just be prepared for that.
I remember it kind of being of a mad dash. You would get the email saying, hey, an interview just posted. And then you've got to run online and try and figure out, okay, this slot's available, this slot's available. And oh crap, this program I really wanted to interview at, I've already put something else in that slot. So there is a little bit of juggling. So the spreadsheet, I'm not that organized. So hats off to the people who can do spreadsheets, but that's a good strategy. But it was kind of like having my watch on. So I would get the email notification, the email just for that. Oh, got to get in there, because there were sometimes that I would go in and the bulk of the interviews at work with my work schedule, you know, being chief of my section made it a little bit easier to move stuff around. But yeah, that was kind of frustrating and something you don't really realize. Well, okay, I did a military for residency match, so maybe this is my first NRP match.
Yeah, I do recall like my experience too is a lot of like scheduling Jenga. Felt like a chief again where you're trying to like match up all your interviews. And I think one of the questions here coming up too is the different formats that you encountered in interviews. If anyone did any in-person versus virtual, if you don't mind like sharing your experiences in terms of how your interviews were structured.
So I think
It
I
seemed
did
on.
mostly virtual. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I feel like I did mostly virtual interviews because just like Adam, I was active duty during the time. I think I did probably all of two in-person interviews. One program didn't really give me the option, and the other one strongly suggested in-person interviews. Aside from that, everything else was virtual, and they were a very different format. Some programs did all of an hour, maybe hour and a half in an evening, and other programs did, half a day fully scheduled, rotating every 20 minutes to a new staff member, very involved interviews. They usually give you a little bit of a heads up in terms of what their interview schedule looks like, but some programs definitely have more of a marathon interview rather than just a casual chat with the program director. So be aware of that.
I was going to say I did two in-person interviews and the rest were virtual. And for the in-persons, I was the only interviewee that particular day. I don't know if that's something that's germane to all programs, but they were definitely a lot more relaxed and I felt like more informal, even though you were in person with the interviewees. It was more like just telling you about the program, whereas the virtual were just very more intense and just kind of staff roulette.
Yeah, the vast majority of my interviews were virtual, but I ended up going to 3 in-persons, and then there were also 3 others that were in person that just didn't work with my schedule that I declined. So I think I assume this year it might be similar, but I know that in talking to of some of the people who I interviewed with, they were wondering and they asked me like what I preferred. And so I think depending on feedback, some of them may do both actually, and there were some programs that offered both options.
I did all of my interviews virtual just because EM is kind of hard to schedule traveling and whatnot. And with my rotating shifts, it was just hard to schedule anything else. But at the same time, I didn't really get any programs that were like, oh, you should come in person or strongly encouraged or anything. So they're pretty good about that.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. All of my interviews were also virtual. And then like, I mean, format wise, kind of like they were saying earlier, you could have like, a short time like with like program director, maybe APD, just kind of go through questions for like an hour, or it'd be like a half day block where you're like rotating regularly, meeting with like the current fellows and like the core faculty and things like that. So it's, pretty cool. Both ways to kind of think about how you will interview.
All right, we'll keep moving to the last preset questions and then open up to chat questions. But how do you choose who to ask for a letter of recommendation from?
Mine was kind of easy. Actually, one of my raters at my first assignment was a sports medicine physician. So he was the flight commander, and my rater for 3.5 of my 4 years at the Air Force Academy as a doc in student health. So that was kind of an easy one, at least. Guess he still thought fondly of me 7 years later.
So I had a very hard time finding actual sports medicine physicians that practiced in the field. Again, coming from internal medicine, it was easier probably to find a rheumatologist than it was to find a sports med physician. So I tried to find people in who knew me, who knew how much I cared about musculoskeletal medicine, who were able to speak to my career as a attending and how I catered my interests and my teaching interests to musculoskeletal medicine. Those were probably two of my letters. And I will warn people who are non-traditional applicants that they expect a letter from your, you know, program director who was your program director at the time of you being in residency, which does not always line up to who that program director is now. So, yeah, kind of try to give yourself some time to hunt people down and be able to ask for those letters.
To bounce off of that, I was going to say that one of the benefits of being a resident while applying is that I had a lot of attendings around. They're all very knowledgeable of how much I love sports medicine. So I just went with my program director, my APD, and then my two mentors. One is an ultrasound fellow, and then the other one who is a sports med doc, EM sports med doc, who became my number one mentor during residency. So I asked for 4 letters, and then I would pick and choose which letters to send to each program based on what they asked for.
And for me, kind of similar. I'm, a third year EM resident, so I talked to my program director and like some of the mentors for my program who are like EM, who like knew how much like I enjoyed like sports medicine and like the things that I've like done for like my program specifically, given that my program is actually new. And yeah, so I like got those individuals to write letters for me. I did get one sports medicine doc who was EM trained to write a letter. It got there actually after I had like submit everything and never got uploaded. So I actually didn't have like a specific sports medicine letter in my application, which I thought was going to be hard for me, but it still ended up being like really, really good and really great. So yeah, even if you don't have a sports medicine letter, you can still match. So yeah, it's good.
And I guess for my program director letter, since my program director has since long retired and moved on, I actually faculty for an Air Force Peds residency program. So I just went to the program and said, hey, you've seen how I work as faculty. Can you please write me a letter? So Dr. Kiger at Wright Pat was kind enough to write a letter for me. So that felt a little bit weird since I outranked her to ask that question, but at any rate, and then I had a colleague who worked with me in the adolescent clinic do it. So it was just, finding people and trying to be creative.
And I would recommend looking at each program's website because each program actually has different requirements. Some of them specify that they want 1 letter from a sports med doc, and then others don't say anything at all. I think almost universally all of them wanted a PD letter, so that was one I knew I had to send to each and every program. And then I think most programs asked for 3 letters. Some of them gave you the option of 4. But I would have, at minimum, I would try to find 3 people, one of them being your PD, or if you're non-traditional, I guess someone else. And then if you can find someone who's sports med, I think a lot of programs specify that they want at least one sports med letter. And I think for that third level, really, for that third letter, it's just anyone who really knows you very well. So I had one of my Gen Peds attendings write me one because I worked very closely with her on research and I knew she would write me a strong letter. And maybe she couldn't necessarily speak to my MSK knowledge as much, but she could speak to other aspects like work ethic, my research, and whatnot.
Excellent. Those are great. Thank you all for the great insight to those questions. We can now open up the chat to any questions and answers that they would like to be addressed from the audience. One that I would love to hear your guys' input on is how you, I know we have heard some spreadsheets and different ways of geography of evaluating different programs, but how else did you look into your rank order list specifically? What things did you kind of weigh in as important factors for differentiating one program for another?
Spousal preference. So if you have a significant other, definitely having them look at it and make sure that they're on board. They haven't been married for 20 years for no reason. Actually, 21 years in about 2 weeks, good times.
Well, I did not have anyone else to consider when I made these decisions, but definitely looking at the coverage opportunities that are available and making sure that the program was going to be able to line your future plans up with their coverage availability, because there's a lot of community-based programs. They're smaller, they're not at academic centers. And if you are looking to, try to go professional coverage, stuff like that, you may need a very different type of program than that. You may need a huge D1 school with huge recognition and such. So I realizing kind of what your aspirations are when you're looking both at what programs to apply to and then how to rank them may be important.
Another factor is just number of fellows. Originally for me, multiple fellows was a big deal, but ultimately what I ended up ranking higher and matching, I'm a solo fellow, but you get a feel for during the interviews, are you a RVU monkey or is it more about teaching and kind of what is the culture of the fellowship, especially if you're the solo fellow there? Is it somewhere where they're going to work you to death, or is it somewhere where they're more about teaching? And that's one definitely thing I really appreciate about the program that I matched at.
For me, ranking was hard. Like, I don't know why. I really liked all the programs I ended up interviewing at. So what ended up like defining my ranking was just how I felt in the interview, and number of fellows was also key as Dr. Freeman mentioned. But for me, it was mainly just what I felt like during the interview, the culture around everything happening, and just what they said they treated their fellows like.
Mine was also like the same. I really so for me actually like ranking was a little bit easier because what I did is the same thing I did for like EM residency. So like immediately after I finished my interview, I would make a video of like how that interview went. And I would like, talk about the interview. Usually, I mean, I talk for a while. So usually my videos be like 5 to 10 minutes, but I would like go through like how I felt and with talking with each person, like the PD down to like the fellows, like what did I feel? What types of things are they doing? What's their ED like presence like? Are they acting as fellows? Are they acting as attendings? Like what for EM specifically? Like what are those things? And like what was their like sports coverage like? And so every interview I would make a video and then kind of keep a running list. Like, okay, well, I like this program a little bit more, this program a little less, didn't really like that. And that was like on every single interview. So by the time I finished my interview season, I kind of had the list pretty set. And, I just talked it over with my wife a little bit about like, what would be the best for the family. But we kind of kept that going. So that was really big and important for me to kind of help me figure out the plan.
I think for me, it boiled down to a few things. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted exposure to both peds and adults. I wanted a strong ultrasound curriculum. And I think I've grown more interested in research during residency. So I wanted to continue to explore that in fellowship. So I wanted to go to a program that had strong research. And then I think I thought that I would do something similar, like type out lots of notes for all these programs. And I should have remembered that back in residency, I think I did that for the first 3 programs and then just got so exhausted by that. So I think by the end, a lot of it was just obviously thinking about geography since I'll be long distance, but just I think when you go on your interview, there are some programs that you just know click. And I think the program UW, I think, was one of the last programs I think it was actually like the absolute last program I interviewed at, and that day I knew. And my mentor had to be like, no, Tammy, you cannot send them a letter of interest the same day that you interview there. So she told me to sleep on it, and I slept on it. And ultimately, I think it hit those few things that I really thought were important to me. And then also just, I think it was just a very collegial, very friendly atmosphere that I appreciated. So those were the things that I looked for.
One question from the chat, if you guys don't mind sharing, how many programs did you apply to? And again, if you could say your specialty again, if people can't remember.
I can, oh, go ahead.
I'm an EM resident, and I ended up applying to about 40 programs, I think, just because I thought my CV was kind of weak and I didn't really have a lot of sports medicine coverage during residency or anything. So I just tried to widen my net, and I actually ended up applying to 40 programs, interviewed at like 10, I think, and I ended up matching in my top 3. So went well.
James, EM, I applied to 28 programs. I believe they're mostly concentrated in the East Coast and like the Southeast. I ended up interviewing at 8, and I ended up matching in my like top 5. So I felt really good about like all the stuff that like I was interested in, and like all my programs were like really good. So it was, again, keeping a log or something kind of going on with each interview definitely made it a lot easier to do that process. So yeah.
So
I'm gonna say
since
like 20.
I was a non-traditional applicant, I didn't know what the process looked like at all, and I didn't know what the expected number of interview ratios was going to be. I applied to about 30 programs, also all on probably mostly the Southeast, with about 30-ish% interview rate, at least for me, and that's with internal medicine background.
Yeah, my similar numbers, about it was either 28 or 30. I ended up with 15 interviews and matched my top 5. Pediatrics, adolescent medicine, sorry.
Next topic that people would like to know about is specific to sideline coverage, and what your experiences were, if you could elaborate on that. And if you don't mind sharing with the audience too, one thing that probably would come up too, and how you formatted your CV and including your sideline coverage, if you had any.
I can answer that question. I got a question about it from someone who's looking to apply this season. So I think ERAS has changed a little bit over the past few years where now you are limited to 10 experiences, which I actually kind of like. I think it cuts out a lot of the bloat and it really helps you to hone in on the experiences that are important. So it's more about the quality of your experiences as opposed to the quantity, which I think makes sense because we're in residency and like there's just not much time to do much. So for my sideline coverage, that was all 1 out of the 10 experiences, and I ended up using bullet points for pretty much all of that experience. I think I did use prose in some of the other experiences, but in talking to some other people who have applied to fellowship, they used bullet points, so I don't think it matters too much. But that is how I've put out my sideline coverage. I'm curious if anyone did it differently.
I used bullet points too. Uh, I like my things short, sweet, and to the point. So I get lost in reading prose sometimes. So I just like bullet points and I like stating like, this is what I did, this is why I worked, and just straight to the point without a lot of things going on around it. It also helped me manage the time of like filling out applications. And I just feel like it was easier for me.
Yeah, you definitely have to do a little bit of a reorganization of your CV, especially if you have, a longer research CV or a longer coverage CV. You have to group things. You have to see what things can be grouped together and what makes sense to group together versus what needs to be set apart. I believe you can mark a couple experiences as most important or something like that on the application. But you cannot do that for every single experience and you have to explain why they're more important than everything else. So once you log into the application, see how it works, you have an opportunity to think about it a little bit, but you're going to have to reorganize it from the way your CV is currently built and kind of see how it makes sense in a new grouping.
Would any of the EM folks mind sharing how early they think or when is an appropriate time to start gathering information in terms of fellowship programs and in that aspect?
Yeah, I can say James EM. I actually started gathering information like at the end of like my first year. Like I really going actually into I don't know, maybe like the February, March area of like first year, is when I started like getting more information about like sports medicine. Because initially I didn't know that you could go through it through EM. I just like was EM, and then I was like, oh wow, there's a pathway for sports. I didn't, kind of know. And so then that was like when I started like doing more research and trying to like, talk with like the sports medicine programs in my area of Detroit, for like what opportunities there are to like shadow or do sideline stuff that way. And then like what like mass events like I could like be a part of. So that's when I kind of started doing it, like end of first year. But I think if you're going into residency, it's never too early to start learning about sports and like what ways and pathways there are for you.
Yeah, so I'm a little different than James. I knew that I wanted to do sports since before starting residency. So I just sort of did EM because it had a pathway to sports. But I had the opportunity to work with a sports EM doctor who came into our residency as a faculty like midway through my first year. So that's sort of when I really started looking into fellowships and programs and opportunities to either shadow him in clinic or if he had any sideline coverage going with him to those. So I started like midway through first year and then went on from there.
And then did anyone do any aways I know it's sometimes hard for programs to give their residents time to go away, but if anyone did, and how long?
So my program was nice enough to let me go for an away rotation for 2 weeks. I went to Washington, D.C. with the MedStar program, and they were pretty great in helping me, like just getting me to see every aspect of sports medicine they could, from family medicine physicians and orthopedics and a little sideline coverage. So it was some great 2 weeks for me, and luckily my program was able to fit it into my schedule. Senior year, that was.
I didn't really have an away per se. So my program is a big teaching hospital, and there is a sports medicine fellowship at my program. And again, given my program is new, like me and my co-residents are the first ones that are going to graduate. Trying to get that together to like get the away was difficult, but we were able to just work with the program that's at my program. I did that actually later in third year as well. So it wasn't before I did my applications that I got the experience. But yeah, I mean, it would have been nicer to do it earlier, but it's still pretty good to get that experience for sure.
The impression I got from talking to some of my mentors was that I didn't have to do it, and so I ended up not doing it. And I I mean, I ended up matching anyway, so it's hard to say whether it's like gonna be like a huge pro to your application. But I will say, I think that if you feel strongly about one program, then I don't think it hurts to go and try to see what it's like. And I think in talking to someone else who has done aways, I think what they found was that it was actually really helpful for them because, for instance, they rotated a program that they thought was a really big academic institution and then found out it was actually more community based, and what they're looking for is something different. Like they want to do lots of research and that program didn't have it, and you wouldn't necessarily always be able to tell from the website. And it was when she went there that she realized that it might not have been what she's looking for. So I think it can be really helpful in that regard.
So while residency was a while back, from an internal med standpoint, I mean, from any standpoint, everybody gets a certain number of electives. So, depending on how they're spaced and when they're spaced, as long as you know what your interests are, most programs will work with you on allowing you to do interest specific rotations that are going to be electives. Whether they're at your institution or away may depend both on capabilities and where you want to go, what kind of contracts they have, how feasible it is. But as long as by the time you get to those electives, you know what your interests are and you can tell your program what those interests are so they can accommodate them with enough time, you will probably have more flexibility. So the earlier, the better from that standpoint.
One topic I heard I would about, and I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on it too. Research, any experiences you had, how important you think it was. I just know that's another common question that applicants like to know about, and hearing from successfully matched fellows, this is a great opportunity to share that platform.
It
Uh,
depends on the program. It totally depends on the program. If you're going to somewhere, some of the children's hospitals, places like Vanderbilt that are very research focused, they're going to want to see that. Whereas if you're going to more of a community-based program, it's more about coverage. So, I mean, it really depends on the program in all honesty.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think like the programs that I applied to, I don't think that it was like high up. I mean, of course, if you could do research, yes, that would be good. I had one program like asked me a question about research that I did like when I was a med student, but that was really it. I haven't done any like research in like residency for it. And so like it just really depends. I think but most of the programs that like I looked into, like didn't really seem like there was like a big like, oh, what's your research like? And that was something that I was really concerned about, like applying. I thought that, me being EM, not having this like clinic background, not doing research, it's going to be like, oh, I'm like, I don't know how what's the word I'm looking for? Strong of a applicant am I going to be without these things that I thought that I needed. So I don't think that it's like super big, but I think like it does depend on the program that you're looking into for the research.
So again, coming off EM, I don't have a lot of research, and it depends really on the programs. But I did find that I had some like smaller publications and like wow, or I had a couple of posters that I did with residency that were MSK based. So those kind of helped in the process, and they were talking points in the interviews. So I guess those sort of helped, but they're not really research based, just tiny little publications every now and then.
I think research and publications can work to your benefit if they are specialty specific. If they are not specialty specific, obviously, it becomes more of a challenge. So it doesn't matter how much of a research resume you have, if it's not in a particular direction that's related to your fellowship, it's not going to be particularly useful.
I think I had a decent amount of research, and I think that helped my application because I'm going to an institution that's very research heavy. That being said, my co-fellow, if you caught the tail end of the family med talk, she talked about how she didn't have a lot of research and she was interested in it, but that was something that she was a little bit worried about, but she ended up matching back at UW as well. So I think, I don't know what the magic formula is, but I can say that for me, I think research worked, but it may have been because I think, as many people have mentioned, it's very institution specific.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of these sentiments too. I think it makes you a stronger applicant, but the lack of doesn't necessarily hurt you just because programs are aware of how hard it is to get meaningful research published and completed in the time of a resident, given how much you're already working clinically and doing all your other work. And I do think it's a benefit, nice feather in your cap if you can do it, but I wouldn't be very nervous if you don't have those experiences on something on your CV. Another question I want to bring up to the group, since a lot of people have kind of talked about things too, but in terms of regional preferences and if programs outside of your region, whether they still considered you for interviews or not.
Yeah, I had a couple that was kind of out the Southeast, mainly military. So it was, I knew someone that knew someone that knew someone that kind of helped out. So
I also have been kind of around, like I'm from DC, went to like school in Atlanta and med school in Nashville, and now I'm up in Detroit. So I've kind of been in the East Coast. And so I was looking at programs in that area. I didn't really go again past like Michigan, because of like kind of my geographical area and like me having the family. I do think, I don't know how well I would have been like again competitive like for like if I was trying to go to California without any ties or anything like that. But I do think that like yeah, if you're looking in a specific area and you don't have ties to that area, but you really want to be in that area, like reaching out to programs like early on, like, hey, I'm really interested in coming out here. This is what I want to do. And you have reasons like why you want to come out there. I think that that'll be just beneficial for you in the application process if you don't have ties to an area.
I will say that I interviewed, I think two of the interviews I had were outside of my geographic preference, and one of the earliest questions I got from them were, why would you be interested in coming here? So if you are interested, send a program an email or get in contact with them. If you can explain why you are interested in that program, regardless of your indicated regional preference, they will consider you. Just be prepared to kind of defend that decision to apply there.
I applied very widely. So as mentioned earlier, basically any city with the direct flight from Sacramento. And I think I applied to around 22, got 18 interviews, it looks like. And then my list was pretty much split a third, a third, a third. Like those who offered me interviews were pretty much a third West Coast, a third Midwest, and then a third East Coast. So I didn't feel like they discriminated against me because I've been from the West Coast. But I will say there's one thing that you should take note of on ERAS. You have the option of putting your geographic preference there. And I actually did not, even though I was thinking that I wanted to match back at the West Coast and ultimately I'm here in the West Coast, I actually did not select a geographic preference. And the reason I did not do that is because if you select West Coast, for instance, as your geographic preference, great, all your West Coast programs can see that. But my fear was that the East Coast programs would be able to tell that I didn't select East Coast as my preference and thus wouldn't give me an interview. So I left it completely open. I think if you're only going to be applying like West Coast, then I guess it doesn't matter and you can always put that as your preference. But if that's something you're worried about and you would like to open up your options a little bit more, I'd probably not necessarily select a geographic preference because it can be a hint to the programs that maybe they're not your preference, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, coming from Puerto Rico, I had to relocate anyway because all the programs are applied to are in the continental US. So for me, like every interview was, how easy would it be for you to relocate? Would you be comfortable living here? Like, do you have any family or friends around the area? So just be ready to answer those questions in each interview. And like what I did was I would research the community around where the program was located, like things to do, just to be prepared to be able to talk to why I would move there.
Excellent, guys. This was very, very helpful. And I just want to be mindful of your guys' time because I know, well, at least on the East Coast, it's a little bit getting close to getting late. And I know people have children, 2 kids. And I do want to ask the panel if you could share one kind of final thoughts and reflections on the match and what advice you'd like to pass on for people who are listening right now and people who are going to tune into this later, what you think is one thing that you'd like them to take from this? Could be from a mentor as well, or just any reflections, really.
I'm glad I wasn't the only non-traditional panelist on the speaker group. But so if you find yourself in the military, peds, internal medicine, ER, the military, pretty much family medicine has sports medicine locked up if you're trying to do it as a military physician. There have been 2 Army docs who have gone or will be going through as Army sponsored pediatricians. So that is a avenue that's starting to open up. But be willing to kind of keep the contacts out there. And I'm retiring from active duty in, nice beard, I guess, in like a month. So this is kind of a post military retirement thing for me in a second fellowship. I've already done one in adolescent medicine. So I would say you're probably never too late and you're never too old. And I'm actually younger than the fellow I'm replacing at UT Knoxville. So ageism isn't necessarily out there. So if you are a little bit non-traditional, if you're watching this later on, go ahead and give it a shot.
So
I think,
my
go ahead.
sorry, my final takeaway is just apply to whatever programs you like, research them, make sure you like the geographical area, the culture around it, that they meet your standards, and just show yourself up in their interviews, know who you are. And I mean, if they'll like you, and you'll be fine.
I will say something that I discovered probably a harder way. Be very honest in your interviews about your interests, about what you want to do, about where you plan on going. I think it will help the right program find you, and you find the right program, because the conversations it will lead you down during your interview path may be more insightful than if you tell programs what you think they want to hear.
Yeah, I also agree with that. It's important to, again, be honest with yourself. I think if you're interested in like sports, I definitely recommend like doing as much research as you can. Whatever the specialty is, and definitely try to learn as much as you can. Um, do as much research in the places in the geographical area. Make sure that you like, again, for EM like applicants, like, does this program, like, have they taken EM applicants? Are they EM, friendly? Those are the things that like are really important. And then like what is it that you like the most? Like, do you like research? Do you like, clinic? Do you like sideline coverage? Things like that is really important. And so I think, just be positive about going through the process, like, and definitely like I think is a fun time, like going through the interviews for sure. But like, you can definitely do it, and yeah, I think you'll be great.
The last thing that I would say is that where there's a will, there's a way, and none of the circumstances we're coming from are ever going to be perfect, right? I'm PEDS trained, can apply to a lot of the programs out there. It sounds like for IM, it's just a handful. We have some non-traditional panelists here, and even for EM, I know that it's harder to find programs that accept EM. And so for me, that actually made me very worried during intern year when I thought I wanted to do sports med. And I come from a program where there's no PEDS trained sports medicine physicians. We have a sports medicine fellowship, but it only accepts PM&R residents. And so pretty much all of our faculty are primarily PM&R. But I think I knew that I really wanted to do sports medicine. So I reached out to fellowship director, and she connected me with some sports medicine doctors in the PM&R department who actually happen to not even be PM&R trained. They're IM and FM trained. So I think, there will always be someone who's willing to take you under their wing, and it might not be as easy to find as you anticipated, but I think we're all coming from unique backgrounds here, and sports medicine is a niche field. So I think there's a lot of understanding on programs' parts that you're just not always going to have every single experience out there that maybe some other people in other programs may have, and that's okay. Just, I think, make it happen with what you have, and I think you can still tell a really great story during your interviews.
This was perfect. I mean, I agreed with all these sentiments just because I'm med peds. I very not the typical candidate. And I also have like 2 young children too, and things like that. I think everyone's story is very unique. It's very different. And the way you share your story through your personal statement, through your CV, through your time during your interview, it sets you apart. And just being able to convey your story and where you want the rest of your book to be written, I think is the way you kind of share that with the programs you want to, and be open and honest, like people are mentioning too, and the right program will find you and you will find your place. And one thing I would also say is reach out and ask. You never know what's going to happen. I've had a lot of different mentors, and I've met them all through asking, especially when COVID started too. I was an intern, so there was like a lot of sports coverage was not happening. So I had to do a lot of things virtual. You be proactive, you do different things, you find your way to tell your story. And that's what my final takeaway too is: try not to say no if you can't. Understand when no is the right answer, and don't take on too many things, because then it makes it harder for other things in life. But Congratulations again to all of you who recently matched. Excited to see where the rest of your stories go, and it's awesome. A pleasure to meet you all, and thank you guys for tuning in, present virtually and listen to this in the future. So thank you again. Have a good night.